More trades. So many trades. Trades everywhere, and it's all the Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs are going absolutely crazy. Kyle Dubas knows this is his last shot potentially to get this team past the first round, and they know they're going against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So what do? Well, they're trying to get guys that can target the Tampa Bay Lightning. And one of those guys they think is Luke Schenn. Here is the trade coming through, a trade we've been seeing coming for a while, and that is Frank Seravalli announcing that the full trade per sources is Luke Schenn to the Toronto Maple Leafs in return for a 2023 third round pick. Let's start with the obvious. The Canucks had to trade Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn is on an expiring deal. He's 30-something years old, 32, 33, and will be 34 at the start of next season. There was thoughts, you could extend him, you could do all of this, but it's UFA on an expiring contract. Unfortunate situation with, I guess, his wife being pregnant at the time, but still, the Canucks needed to recoup some value. Now, the rumor has been for the last few days and maybe even the last week or so that the Canucks were waiting for a team to come forward with a second-round pick. They said, we want a second-round pick for Luke Schenn. All these other teams said, we'll give you a third-round pick. And the Canucks just sort of held pat, which I think is the right thing to do, especially when you have a week until the trade deadline. But the Toronto Maple Leafs are one of the teams that had said, we will give you a third-round pick. And the Toronto Maple Leafs are making all of their moves right now. And they've got all these irons in the fire trying to sort everything out. And they probably came back to the Canucks and said, look, we are withdrawing from the Luke Schenn race unless we do this now because we are going to have to go a different direction. Now, they just made that Sandin trade earlier today. They traded for Jake McCabe. They've done all this defensive stuff that feels like they're just accumulating defensemen at this point. And they still, now that they've added this Luke Schenn cap it, I think they now cannot activate Matt Murray again, even though they could shortly after that Sandin trade. There's so many weird little things going on for Toronto, but being Canucks focused, let's focus on what this means for the Canucks. Luke Schenn this year had a career season points-wise. His career high was in Toronto 2 seasons, 2010, 2011, 2011, 2012, 22 points in each of those seasons. He's got 21 this year with about 20-something games to go still. So Luke Schenn is going to set a career high in points if he plays hockey games. It's just the way it will work. However, as a defenseman, points aren't everything, right? And where we can see that really shine through is on the analytical side. And Luke Schenn has been, I think, really important in developing Quinn Hughes over these last couple of years. I think he has turned Quinn Hughes into a better player. Not that Luke Schenn is the guy you want next to Quinn Hughes for a long time, but we can look at some analytical stuff. And we're going to look at Dom, we're going to look at Jay Fresh. We'll start with Jay Fresh. And his note is physical, bottom pairing, stay-at-home defenseman, which is fair. Most prolific hitter in the NHL. That is true. He gets a lot of penalties because of it. So if we look at this graphic here, we can see a couple of things, right? That WAR percentile, which is right here next to my face, took a nosedive. Last year, he was about a 30th percentile defenseman. This year, right around 0, maybe 5th percentile. This 6 is projected. That's not actually what the number is on the right. Looks like 4, 5, 5th percentile-ish. But that doesn't tell the whole story. And he mentions in his tweet that the penalties have a big impact on that because he takes way more penalties than he draws. Offensively, 29th percentile. Defensively, 43rd percentile. So honestly, a fine third pairing defenseman and a good leader to have on a team pushing for the playoffs. So for the Leafs, do I like this deal? I don't know enough about how they're going to turn the gluttony of defensemen that they have into their game one roster against Tampa Bay, but I like a guy like Luke Schenn in a playoff role. He seems to fit the bill as the perfect rental, black ace, 6 defenseman type of rental. For the Canucks, we all wanted it to be a second, but so many moves are being made currently that they had to do something at some point, and it's much better, I think, to pull a third round pick. And sure, that might only have a 20% chance of landing an NHL player in the future, but it is still currency, right? The Canucks have had some currency that was about to expire in a couple of months, and they turned it into some different currency that does not expire until, the prospect gets selected. They might be good, they might be bad. Maybe that currency goes up or down, but it doesn't expire. So the Canucks adding a third round pick in the 2023 NHL draft. And if that's the best they could do, it's the best they could do. The other angle of this is, do the Canucks re-sign Luke Schenn? And let's also take a look at Dom's analytical profile as well. One thing that I like about Dom's cards is this top bar here. He gets paid $0.9 million. His market value is $1.4 million as of his play this year. So he's playing like a fine bottom six defenseman, giving a surplus value of about $500,000. Again, that penalty differential is doing a lot of work here. But he is a completely fine 3D that takes too many penalties. And that's sort of just where he is. Now, you can compare that to last year, where his defensive plus minus was 16.9. This year it's minus 10.8. So there has been that nosedive that you saw on Jay Fresh's card as well. But Luke Schenn, I mean, even if he's not, he's a good guy in the locker room to have. He's good for a playoff team, you would think. And I think his style of play, where he takes too many penalties, less penalties get called in the playoffs, especially when they're like big hits and things like that. So I think Luke Schenn's a fine piece. As for the angle of will the Canucks re-sign Luke Schenn in the offseason, probably not. Everyone always says this, and it seems like such a good idea on paper, right? Luke Schenn lives here. His family is here. He probably will want to come back, and maybe that is the case. However, that gets said with every single UFA rental that is ever given out, ever traded for, and it usually just doesn't happen, right? It usually just doesn't come to fruition. They usually go somewhere else. Now, would I be happy if the Canucks brought Luke Schenn back at $1 million for next year? Sure. That's fine. The Canucks have no defenseman, but do I see it happening? Not necessarily. Anyways, though, leave your thoughts down below on this Luke Schenn trade. We'll see if we get more coming up soon. But yeah, it's a crazy day trade-wise, and it looks like it will keep continuing. See you in the next one.